Hello everyone. Welcome to discussion on Yoga Sutras. We'll be continuing subject. This recorded and will be posted on YouTube. If you have missed any of the previous discussions, please feel free to go on YouTube and ask. Also, if you have any questions, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask.
This meeting is being recorded.
So thank you and welcome. Good evening. So we'll begin the class. These two verses of invocation I shall chant and then we begin the class. Yogena chittasya padena vacham malam sharirasya cha vaidyakena yopakurotam pravaram mrinam patanjalim pranjaliranatosmi stuve patanjalim vyasam shankaram cha munitrayam katra sutrasya bhashyasya kramat vivaranasya cha. So we already discussed some of the earlier sutras, so I want to remind you again, because many of you will have these printed volumes, printed books of Yoga Sutras, and in this text the order of the chapters, the way the chapters are arranged is like this. First Samadhipada, then Sadhanapada, then Vibhudipada and Kaivalyapada. So the 4 chapters. But in terms of actual yoga practice, from the standpoint of a spiritual evolution, it's a bit different. We begin with Sadhanapada. Sadhana means practices. And then the results, the consequences, the powers, what we derive, what benefit we derive from yoga practice, that is Vibhudipada. And then Samadhipada, concentration, which is the result of yoga practice. And the last ultimate goal of yoga is Kaivalya, liberation. So this is how it is normally arranged. But I have slightly changed the pattern. I will begin with Sadhanapada, then Vibhudipada, then Samadhipada, but Kaivalyapada. But it may not be appropriate to begin with the first sutras of Sadhanapada. For the advantage of those who study the scripture, we have to cover some of the earlier sutras of Samadhipada, because they deal with the definitions and explanations of yoga as a system. Some of the technical terms are defined, and these definitions are very important. For example, what is vritti, what is chittam, and what you mean by getting the ultimate result. These conceptual definitions are included in the first few sutras of Samadhipada. So we already discussed some of the sutras. The first one, Atha Yoga Anushasanam, we already discussed. Now, the word yoga itself has got different connotations and different meanings in the yoga literature. Sometimes some authors like Vyasa and others define yoga itself as the final goal of yoga practice. It's called a Niruddha state. Now, to understand that definition of yoga, we should know what is Niruddha state. So, there 5 levels of human mind are explained. That is Kshiptam, Mudham, Vikshiptam, Ekagram, Niruddham. Kshipta, for example, it means it is when the mind is restlessly moving about without any inclination towards concentration, and he cannot focus on anything higher. That particular state is called Kshipta state. In its advanced state, it becomes a pathological state of human mind, which belongs to the realm of abnormal psychology. But in ordinary situation, most of us or many of us we feel this restlessness. It is not a pathological state, a natural state of human mind, moving restlessly without being able to concentrate on anything. It is active, but it is not able to focus on anything. That is Kshipta state. The next one is Moda. Moda, where you are benumbed, where it is a kind of sleepy state induced by tama, inertia, sleepishness, etc. To understand this, there is an interesting definition here. There is a great yoga teacher, 19th century. His name is Hariharananda Aranya. Aranya is one of the 10 orders, monastic orders founded by Shankaracharya. He has a statement, he said, Ragadi moha vishayasya chittasya ya mudhavastha sa mudha bhumi. So he considers this mudha state as a state of human mind where mind is full of passions, strong passions, but you are not very active, you are not very energetic, mind is not very active, it remains in a state of inertia. In some kinds of patients suffering from depression, you find this. Melancholia, you find this. So it's something very interesting. If there are amongst you some who have specialized in psychiatry, especially abnormal psychology, will be struck by the deep insights into human mind, including the abnormal mind, that you find in the Yoga Sutra literature. Not Patanjali directly, but in the commentaries on Yoga Sutra. For example, this one. It's actually a classical picture of a person suffering from melancholia. These are 2 abnormal states. The third state, as I mentioned earlier, is Vikshipta state. Now, why am I explaining this? To understand what yoga actually implies, we must keep all this in mind. The third state is Vikshipta state, where again this great yoga teacher in his book, called Bhaswati is the name of the commentary. So there he says, Kadajit kam chittasya chitta samadhanam, kadajit kam chitta samadhanam, samadhana chikishaya tattva-jnanaya sadhanam chadrishyate. Sometimes you feel a great peace of mind, sometimes it is gone. I already explained this in plain simple English in the last session. You go to a prayer hall, you go to a temple, a church, a synagogue, you attend a Yoga Sutra class, you attend a wonderful music, or maybe a recitation of poetry. Suddenly you feel a great absorption. I've seen this really happening in Vedanta society. Sometimes we will have big puja celebrations, puja homa, mantras. So people sit with eyes closed in the prayer hall. It may take sometimes 2 hours. And then at the end of that day, they will say, oh, Swamiji, we had a wonderful time. Now, it's good to have a wonderful time, but it also shows that it was not so very wonderful. Why? Because you are comparing your previous state, which was not so very wonderful, with the state that you have just now. That is Vikshipta Manaha. Mind was suddenly mind was absorbed in some higher thoughts when you attended the puja. And then mind has a tendency to go back to another state. It is a classic example of vikshipta mana. So that is why kadajit kam chitta samadhana means once a while suddenly a little bit of mental peace and then it's gone. Now this is natural, this is the natural state of human mind that you find among spiritual seekers, sincere seekers. Of course, Yoga Sutra lays down a step-by-step path, a ladder of ascending steps towards a state where this peace of mind becomes a natural state. That's the purpose of yoga. When you are attending a puja, when attending a prayer in the church or a synagogue or any place of worship, you are happy, you are peaceful, you are contemplative. How to keep that contemplative mind, that peaceful state of human mind, even when you are working in the factory, in the university, in the workplace, in the markets. That is the purpose of yoga. I am not exaggerating. Swami Vivekananda in 1900 when he visited San Francisco, he walked through the market streets and then he makes a statement. Standing right in the middle of Market Street in San Francisco, if you can keep your mind absorbed in peace and tranquility, then you are a real yogi. That is the purpose of Vedanta. That is something very interesting. So, that is what yoga seeks to help you to reach. That is Vikshipta Mana. Next two states, according to Vyasa, are higher states, Ekagram. Sometimes you will find this explained in the later sutras called Samprajnata Samadhi, where your mind, the mental world, takes the form of one single blissful vritti. We feel inner conflict in the mind and we take to yoga when we feel these conflicts, and these conflicts are due to the confrontation or conflict between two opposing sets of vrittis, samskaras. Again, we should remember what vritti means. Vritti is nothing but the residual effect of whatever we experience. When you do something good, something pleasant, well, something, let us say, spiritual, after some time, you feel your mind has absorbed some spiritual ideas and mind feels a lot of inner peace and tranquility. It's called Chitta Prasada in the language of the Yoga Sutras. And if you do something wrong, if somebody does something to you, something wrong, if you are experiencing it, either from your own mind or from somebody outside, then also that unhappy experience leaves behind a residual impact, residual effect. That is also a vritti. So vrittis can be positive or negative. Vrittis, samskaras, sankalpas, all these are interrelated. Impressions, feelings, memories, all these are interrelated. Eventually you find they all constitute the same mental phenomenon. So there are good vrittis, bad vrittis. Good memories, bad memories. Good impressions, bad impressions. So they conflict. They fight among themselves. There is a kind of disharmony. When this happens, we are not able to enjoy peace of mind. Such a mind is called Vikshipta Mana. But at the same time, when after long spiritual practices, your mind naturally feels this inner peace, then the mind takes one single vritti, blissful, happy, pleasant vritti. That state is called Ekagra Mana. That's a fourth state. In the Yoga Sutra vocabulary, sometimes it is called Samprajñata Samadhi, that you'll study later when you deal with Samadhipada and later Kaivalyapada. This is discussed elaborately. The fifth state is, Niruddha state. In fact, that is what yoga actually implies according to the classical commentators. See, yoga is not a physical exercise. Yoga is a state where you become naturally established in this blissful, peaceful, tranquil state of mind. In the yoga tradition, it may be called Asamprajñata Samadhi, where even the last blissful vritti is gone, you are completely able to transcend the entire mental world of impressions and samskaras. In fact, you transcend your mind. Transcending our mind means going beyond our mind. Going beyond our mind means reaching yoga in its ultimate conclusion. That is called Yogaha Chitta Vritti Nirodha and Atha Yoga Anushasanam. In the first and second sutras, yoga is defined and yoga is further elaborated. So yoga here should be understood to reaching that state, Niruddha Vritti, well, all vrittis are transcended. When you reach that state, you are totally free from all conflicts, all doubts, all skepticism. That is what exactly the implication of the second sutra, Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha. Now we have already discussed the third sutra, that is Tada Drashtu Surupe Avasthanam. Now here there are certain terms used here. I already gave a brief, somewhat superficial interpretation of the sutra in plain modern language. Now I shall give the deeper implications according to the commentators. The literal translation is simple. When you reach that yoga state, then drashtuhu surupe, drashta means the seer, is nominative, seer, the experiencer, the witness. Drashtu is Shashti Vibhakti, sixth case, means a possessive case. Drashtuhu Sarupa means the real natural state of seer experiencer. When you reach that state of yoga, you get established, the seer gets established in his own real state, which is totally free from the interference of vrittis, totally free from conflicts. You become established in your own natural state. This is the meaning here. Now, drashta, the witness here means, according to traditional scriptures, it means Purusha. So what is Purusha? We should understand. For that, we must know a little bit of the philosophical background of yoga. So that will take us little away from the Yoga Sutras proper. We must remember these two systems of Indian philosophy, that is Sankhya philosophy and Yoga philosophy. Both are interrelated. Yoga is the applied form of Sankhya. In other words, Sankhya is a theoretical aspect of yoga. Now, what is Sankhya? Sankhya philosophy can be roughly called the Indian school of evolutionism. In India's philosophical landscape, if you make a brief analysis, you find there are 12 distinct systems of philosophy. Of course, there are innumerable. I am just giving the broad generalization. 12 distinct schools of philosophy. Of them, 6 schools belong to theistic systems. It's called Astika Darsanas in the traditional Orthodox circles. The other one is called Nastika Darsanas. Astika means the orthodox, the conservative, which the conservative schools of Indian philosophy, which accept the Vedas as an important testimony, as an important tool of epistemology, as a Pramana, as we call it. Those who accept Vedas, those who look upon Vedas as an important, as the paramount testimony. According to Purvamimamsa and Uttaramimamsas, Vedas are the supreme. According to other 4 schools, Vedas are accepted. It's called Orthodox schools of Indian philosophy, Astika Darsanas. The other 6 are Nastika Darsanas, the non-orthodox, the heterodox, the non-conservative. That group includes the 4 schools of Buddhism, both belonging to, all the 4 belonging to Mahayana and Hinayana systems. The 2 schools of idealism, Shunyavada and Vijnanavada, belonging to Mahayana system. The 2 schools of realism, Sautrantika and Vaibhashika, belonging to Hinayana system, plus Jaina philosophy, and Charvaka, it's called Indian materialism. The first school of materialistic philosophy that world is produced was in India. In fact, it is a very ancient system. So it's called Charvaka philosophy. Means a kind of it is a kind, we can say, Epicureanism, utilitarianism with a bohemian touch, if you want a description in terms of corresponding Western philosophical terms. It is a kind of Epicureanism and a kind of ultra-utilitarianism plus a little bit of bohemian approach to life. This is called Charvaka system. So these are the 6 systems of non-orthodox or heterodox systems of Indian philosophy which do not accept Vedas as a testimony, as a tool for understanding the supreme reality. Of these 12 systems, Sankhya and Yoga belong to the orthodox schools of Indian philosophy. Sankhya system of philosophy is attributed to a great ancient thinker, a sage called Kapila. And Yoga philosophy, as we know, is attributed to Patanjali. Of these 2, the Sankhya system is more ancient. It is attributed, as I mentioned, to a great sage called Kapila. His sutras are not so easily available today, but his system of philosophy was much more lucidly elaborated by a great thinker who came in the succession of Sankhya philosophers. His name was Ishvara Krishna. He wrote a well-known book called Sankhya Karika. And according to this school, there are 2 fundamental categories which are eternal. One is Prakriti, the other is Purusha. So to understand Tada Drashtu Surupe Avasthanam, to understand its full philosophical background, we must know its connection with the Sankhyan system of philosophy. So in Sankhya system of philosophy, there are 2 fundamental categories. One is Prakriti, the other is Purusha. So it is a dualistic system. It is dualism. Dualism means a system of philosophy which accepts more than one fundamental ultimate category. So, and it is called Indian school of evolutionism because according to this school, the whole universe all the human beings, the physical human beings, the physical aspect of human beings, like our senses of perception, senses of action, our mind, this empirical phenomenal world, all these are evolutes of Prakriti. And that Prakriti, or Pradhana, another name, is unconscious by nature. It is not conscious. It is not effulgent. It is called Jada. It means it has no consciousness. The other category is Purusha. It is consciousness itself. Consciousness is its natural characteristic. So these are two fundamental categories which are eternal fundamental categories in Sankhya philosophy, Purusha and Prakriti. Purusha is consciousness itself, is of the nature of consciousness, and it can be equated with soul, Atman, and so on. Prakriti is unconsciousness. It is called Jada. Purusha is called Chetana. It is called Chaitanyam, effulgence, consciousness. Prakriti is unconscious. It is Jada. It has no Chaitanyam. Out of this Prakriti, the entire universe emerges. So Prakriti or Pradhanam, another name is Pradhanam. So Pradhanam first emerges, the cosmic intelligence, the cosmic intellect is called Mahat. Buddhi or Mahat is cosmic intellect. From that Mahat, Ahankara, the principle of individuation, principle of Aham category, the ego category, the self-identity. And this, it's called Ahankara. This Ahankara has got three dimensions, three aspects, Sattviga, Rajasiga and Tamasika. From a Sattviga aspect, mind evolves. And from Rajasiga and Sattviga aspects, the five senses of perception, the five senses of action evolves. And then from the Tamasiga aspect of Ahankara, the subtle elements evolve. They are called Panchatanmatras, five subtle elements. From these five subtle elements, the five gross elements, Pancha Mahabhutas. So you find 23 evolutes of Prakriti and Prakriti itself, 24. These 24 categories constitute 24, of which 23 are subcategories because they are evolutes of Prakriti. Prakriti is one. Out of this Prakriti, these 23 categories evolve. What are the 23 categories? Mahatattvam, another name is Buddhi, cosmic intellect. From that, Ahankara. Ahankara has got three dimensions, three aspects, Sattviga, Rajasiga and Tamasiga. From these aspects of Ahankara, the five senses of perception, five senses of action, that is Jnanendriyas and Karmendriyas, and the five subtle elements is called Tanmatras, the technical language, and Panchamahabhutas, the five gross elements which constitute the empirical world emerge. In other words, whatever we see around us, this empirical world, and our senses of perception, senses of action, our mind, intellect, etc., all these are evolutes of Prakriti or Pradhana, which is eternal, but it evolves. It is eternal category, but it evolves. So 23 evolutes and Prakriti together constitute 24 plus Purusha 25. Now this is the philosophical landscape of Sankhya system of philosophy. Now coming to yoga, as I mentioned, yoga borrows its philosophy from Sankhya system. But one difference. In Sankhya system, Ishvara, the God idea, has no place. In the last class, somebody raised a question. In fact, in YouTube came as a question, but I saw only after the class was over. Somebody raised a question about Ishvara Pranidhana, what Ishvara Pranidhana means. I'd be happy to respond to this question again at the end of the class if things are not very clear. So understand this, we should know the slight difference between yoga and Sankhya systems of philosophy. In yoga system, Prakriti is accepted, Purusha is accepted, so it is dualistic system, and one extra category is accepted, that is Ishvara. Ishvara Vishesha Purusha, Ishvara. Now, actually this Ishvara is responsible for the karmas which cause our birth, activities, rebirth. For that, this Ishvara has a role. Now, this Ishvara is a Purusha Vishesha, as I called. He is Sarvajñā. So you find Patanjali's Yoga Sutras themselves mention, it is Sarvajñā, the Ishvara is Sarvajñā, is all-knowing, omniscient, so to speak. And Tasya Vachaka Pranavaha, you find, he is the great teacher, he Guru Nam Guru, he is the great teacher, premier teacher. And that Ishvara he is designated by the word Pranava, by the word symbol Pranava, and it is by his will and according to his desire that karmas activate human life and human beings go through these endless cycles of life and death and rebirth and so on. So that's one important point, remember. We should know this. So now we go back to the sutra proper. So our sutra we left behind is Tada Drashtu Surupe Avasthanam. Now as I mentioned, Drashta here means Purusha. What does it mean? According to Yoga and Sankhya philosophy, both systems, we forget our true nature. We identify ourselves with the empirical world. As we evolve from Prakriti coming down to the five elements, the empirical world phenomenon, what really happens is we identify ourselves to be, I am doing this, I am suffering for this, I am enjoying this, I am acting like this. So we identify ourselves with every empirical phenomenon, pain and pleasure, anxieties, worries and all this, raga, dvesha and all this. All this happens because we identify ourselves with these things, and this identification happens because we forget our true nature. And what is our nature? True nature? Our true nature is that we are Purusha. So we de-identify with our true nature, that is Purusha, and we hypnotize ourselves into believing that we are the products of this Prakriti. So we identify ourselves with every passing experience. That you know, Vritti Sarupyam Idaratra, the next sutra. Vritti Sarupyam Idaratra means if you forget your Purusha identity, then we identify ourselves with every single vritti. Something unhappy happens, immediately we get upset. Something pleasant happens, we get overjoyed. Why? Because we identify ourselves with that vritti. Sarupya means that our mind takes the form of that particular experience, pleasant or unpleasant, happy or unhappy. When I see an object, my chitta, my mental world, totally identifies with that visual object, and then I forget my true nature. This all happens because I forget the fact that I am Purusha in reality. So Drashtu Surupa means, Purushasya Surupa means the fact that we are Purusha, that is forgotten. And once you practice yoga, you get established in your Purusha consciousness, that is Drashtuhu Surupa. Surupa here means a translation, you should mean. Then the seer, the experiencer, gets established in his own true nature. That true nature is we are the conscious Purusha. So, the purpose of Ashtanga Yoga, Yama, Niyama, Asana, Pranayama, Pratyakara, Dharana, Dhyana, Samadhi, all the 8 Ashtanga Yogas are disciplines that we undertake to get back to our true nature. When we get back to our true nature, what happens? Then we don't identify with every passing experience. When something unhappy happens, we won't be shocked. We don't identify ourselves with that momentary impulse or momentary experience happening in this world. This freedom from this momentary infatuation or momentary aversion happens when we identify ourselves with our Purusha nature. That is the real meaning of the third sutra, Tada Drashtuhu Surupe Avasthana. And the fourth sutra is very clear, I already mentioned here, Vritti Sarupam Idaratra. At other times, we identify ourselves with vrittis, whatever vrittis happened, whatever vrittis, memories or impressions take place, we identify ourselves with that. That's the idea behind it. Yadrisho Vrittayo Dukkha Mokha Sukha Sugadhyatmika Pradurbhavanti Tadruk Rupa Eva Samvedide Vyavritvigi Purusha. Means what happens, Tadevam Yasmin Igagadya Parinade Chidakase Susmin Surupe, etc. I am not going to those portions. What it means is, if we do not identify ourselves with our true nature, then we identify ourselves with our false nature. What's the false nature? Whenever some momentary unhappy experience happens, we get shocked, we lose our balance because we totally identify with that. We forget this is that this is just part of a passing, changing, momentary phenomenon. That we forget, and we totally identify ourselves with every passing experience. That's what happens. That is Vritti Sarupam Idaratra. Now, the fifth sutra is very important. Vrittaya Panchataya Klishtaha Klishtaha. This is also very important sutra. What are vrittis and how many vrittis are there, etc. All mentioned here. So, vrittis are fivefold. Some of these vrittis are with kleshas, some of them are without kleshas. Klesha, what is klesha? That kleshas are defined in the sadhana pada. Those of you who have got the text, you can see them, but the sutra is simple. Avidya asmida raga dvesha abhinivesha klesha. This is the sutra. You find here. These are the 5 kleshas. Vrittaya Panchataya, Klishta, Klishta, etc. Now, these are kleshas, remember. So, klesha vrittis and that's called klishta vrittis and vrittis which are not klesha vrittis. So, those vrittis which are related to kleshas are called klishta. And those vrittis which are not related to kleshas are called aklishta. A implies negative. So, what are the kleshas? So, you can, if you go to sadhana pada, you will find anyway vidya asmita raga dvesha abhinivesha pancha klesha mentioned here. Ignorance, egoism, attachment, aversion and clinging to life are the 5 kleshas, the afflictions already mentioned here. That is sadhana pada. Now, there are certain samskaras, impressions, mental mendations so called, mental impressions which are related to these 5 klesha vrittis, avidya, smita, etc. Means egoism, ignorance, aversion, extreme liking for certain things, extreme dislike for certain things, and fear of certain things. All these are different kleshas. Certain samskaras are related to this. You can see that our prejudices, our views, our attitudes, the way we look upon life, the way we interpret our own experiences, the way we interpret world can be colored by our previous impressions that the mind has already accumulated in the mental world. And some of them could be in the form of raga, means extreme liking, infatuation for certain things. Very often it's there also some kind of obsessions, obsessive psychosis are related to this raga. And dveshas, that also. Especially delusions of persecution can be related to dveshas, impressions which are negative by nature, unknown irrational fear and hatred and dislike for things. So all these are there. Now here in this coming sutras, there is a description of vritti samskara chakram. Here in this particular sutra, the sixth sutra, vrittis in their most general form are described. They can be, they can also cause these other vrittis, the kleshas that we already discussed earlier. Pramana, viparya, vikalpa, nidra, smrudaya. How vrittis are formed? Pramana, viparya, vikalpa, nidra, smrudaya. Pramana means true knowledge. Viparya means wrong knowledge. Vikalpa, conceptual knowledge, I mean without any corresponding objective reality. Sleep, nidra, smriti, memory. All of them can cause impressions, can be vrittis. Pratyaksha, anumana, agama, pramanani. This is an interesting subject. It is related to metaphysics as a whole, not only yoga. That's an important subject in Indian philosophy. The meaning of this particular sutra only means perception, inference and verbal testimony. Pratyaksha, anumana, agama. Agama means texts, scriptures, important fundamental texts that we look upon as a source of knowledge from an epistemological point of view, from the standpoint of theory of knowledge. Pratyaksha means direct perception. What we see in front of us with the mind and the five senses of perception involved. When I see an important things in front of me, when I hear, when my mind is involved, when mind and eyes come together, I see certain things. When mind and ears come together, I hear things. When mind and the sense of touch come together, I see things by touching. I understand the presence of things by touching. When the mind and the sense of smell come together, then I understand about the presence of an incense stick in front of me. And also the mind and sense of taste come together, I understand certain things by taste. So, mind and the senses of perception together bring certain knowledge. It's called direct perception. Inference is, of course, inference is just you infer certain things, but inference always has the background of direct perception sometime in the past. The classical example that is applicable to Aristotelian concept of inference also, when you see, you have seen that sometime in the past when there was smoke in the mountain and later when you investigated, you came to know there is fire there. So the fire and the smoke, the connection is well registered in our mind through direct perception sometime in the past. Now later on, maybe after some years, when you see a smoke coming from the top of a mountain, immediately you infer, based on your previous direct perception, that there should be fire because smoke is coming. So this connection is called inference. And then agama. Agama is verbal testimony. Well, maybe for Abrahamic religions, this important revealed text constitute the verbal testimony, means the agamas. For Hindu Vedantic tradition, Vedas are the supreme verbal testimony. These are only three tools. So it's called Pramana, means epistemological tools, three tools of theory of knowledge. But you should remember, of course, this is a passing reference, those of you are interested in broader aspects of philosophy. In Hindu tradition, there are actually 10 pramanas, of which the Indian materialism called Charvaka philosophy, accept only one pramana, direct perception. That's because they see only the matter in front of them. Some schools of Buddhism accept one, some accept two. That is direct perception and inference, pratyaksha and anumana. They don't accept agama, verbal testimony. Then certain schools of ritualists like Prabhakara school of Mimamsa accept 5. That is pratyaksha, anumana, agama, arthapatti and anupalabdhi. So pratyaksha, anumana, agama, that means shabda, arthapatti, anupalabdhi. Of course, the Vedantins accept pratyaksha, anumana, upamana, shabda, arthapatti, anupalabdhi. 6. And certain schools of Indian Pauranika schools and mythological schools, they accept 8. Pratyaksha, anumana, upamana, shabda, arthapatti, anubhalabdhi, sambhava, aitihya. Real incident and also here, some legends, beliefs, all that. And some schools of philosophers, very, very rare schools, fringe schools of philosophy, they accept pratyaksha, anumana, upamana, shabda, arthapatti, anubhalabdhi, sambhava, aitihya, cheshta and parisheshya, means external gestures, and the principle of kind of deduction, parisheshya, where you leave out all the other things and what is left out is dependable. Anyway, so you need not go further into this. Those who are interested in Indian epistemology, different schools of epistemology in Indian systems, those who are interested can ask questions during interaction. It's not directly related to Yoga Sutras. But to keep in mind, Indian schools of philosophy, different schools of philosophy accept different types of pramanas or epistemological tools. The most extensive epistemology of any non-system of philosophy exists in Indian philosophical systems. It's called 10 pramanas. Aristotle 3, sometimes 4, but maximum 3 mostly. But in Indian philosophy, you find such an extensive description of different tools of epistemology and theory of knowledge. So, to give a short, in brief, Yoga philosophy accepts pratyaksha, anumana, agama, that is direct perception, inference, and verbal testimony. The Indian materialists, Charvakas, accept one pramana, only direct perception. Buddhists, some of them accept 2 pramanas, that is direct perception and inference. And some of them accept only one pramana, direct perception. That is Sautrantika and Vaibhashika views are there. And then among the Mimamsakas, the Prabhakara Mimamsa accept 5, pratyaksha, anumana, upamana, shabda, anarthapatti. And Vedantics accept 6: Pratyaksha, Anumana, Upamana, Sabda, Arthapatti, Anupalabdhi, and so on. So I'm not going further into details. Now we will describe this again and again. So when you have a correct knowledge, something you have seen through direct perception or through inference or by reading something, you come to know certain things. That will create a vritti, an impression in the mental world. That is one kind of vritti. So we are now, in the coming sutras, we are going to discuss the 5 vrittis mentioned in the 6th sutra. That is Pramana, Vivirya, Vikalpa, Nidra, Smrtaya. True knowledge, wrong knowledge, conceptual knowledge, sleep and memory. These are 5 vrittis. We already discussed the first one. That is Pramana. Pramana here means true knowledge. How do we get true knowledge? It's a very empirical sense it is used. True knowledge we get through direct perception, seeing certain things. I see a certain object with my eyes and mind involved, or inference, or I infer, I guess, I do some guesswork based on my previous experience. And then again, I may read about certain things in a book. That is also one way of getting true knowledge. This is the first one. The second pramana that is mentioned here is viparya. So, viparya is false knowledge of something which does not correspond to its form. So, that also can create vrittis. You hear certain things which may not be real or genuine, which has no real foundation. We may hear from somebody, we may read somewhere, and that also can create a vritti in the mind. So that is viparya, that is false knowledge. Again, avidya also can be a cause of this, our ignorance of certain things, wrong understandings. Something that we eventually come to know is not real, but we wrongly believe it is real before we are corrected. Before we get the correct knowledge, we may hear and read certain things and we may think it is real. So long as we believe that it's real, it can create a very strong vritti in our mind. And once we are corrected, that vritti is temporarily gone, but the vritti will not be completely obliterated from the mental system. It will remain there. That's why it is considered to be a source of vritti. It creates an impression. So impressions are not necessarily created by something that is real knowledge. False knowledge also can create vrittis. When it is proved to be false, the vritti gets weakened, but vritti will be there. To give an example, obsession with washing hands. I don't know, there are certain things, those you are afraid of bacteria, germs, people taking so many baths, washing hands again and again, checking whether the door is locked or not, the switch is switched off or not, all these fears. In fact, in psychiatry, many of the patients know they are totally rational, but they cannot get out of it. It's an example of viparya. An example sometimes. So, many of Patanjali's concepts and Vidyasa's descriptions, Vijnana Bhikshu descriptions, are surprisingly revealing in the light of modern psychiatry. Then Vikalpa, the third pramana is the third vivritti is explained here. Sabdajnananuvati vastushunyo vikalpaha. Conceptual knowledge which is devoid of corresponding object, which is conjured by knowledge which arises from words. You hear certain things, certain words, but there is no objective reality corresponding to that particular word or expression. May not be real, but still it will create a vritti. How mind works, I mean the mysteries of human mind are all revealed by Patanjali. So, we may hear certain words which may not have corresponding objective reality, but still what we hear can create a vritti. So now we will have interaction maybe for half an hour. You are most welcome. Many of the concepts may be new to some of the listeners. I'd be happy to throw further light and explain more on the subject. Thank you. Namaskar. Now we have interaction.
Hari Om Swamiji.
Hari Om. Yeah.
Swamiji, there's a question from Shubhendu on the Zoom call. The question is, Swamiji, nature has provided us Jnanendriya for a purpose. Why is it not right to feel sad when something unpleasant happens and vice versa, feeling joyful when you have a good experience? Why should we suppress feelings? Is it not going against nature? Will it not be too much pressure to suppress your natural nature?
Yeah. Very, very wonderful question. Yoga wants you to swim against the flow of nature. If you want to live as a creature of nature, then you will be coming close to the animal kingdom. What you eventually will understand, yoga wants to bring you back to your own real nature. The real nature, according to yoga psychology, is Purusha. We are totally free, ever free. Suppose you say, every attempt to meditate or pray or practice karma yoga or practice some higher values is going against our nature, then you have to understand what is nature. Nature in its most naked form is nothing going back to, it will be going back to the animal world. Physically, we are not very distinct from the animal world, from purely physical perspective. But human beings have got certain other aspects in their makeup, in the build-up. The mind is the ability to think, the ability to discern, to understand higher things and to practice higher values. So swimming against nature, going against our own biological impulses is the essence of yoga. So in the coming sutras you will find we have evolved from Prakriti. Prakriti is Pradhana, Prakriti is just nature. From Prakriti we have descended Mahatattva, Ahankara, mind, Jnanendriyas, Karmendriyas, Pancha Tanmatras, Pancha Mahabhutas. Last stage is Pancha Mahabhutas, this empirical world, phenomenal world. We have reached the bottom level of the ladder of evolution. And yoga is trying to help you climb up the steps, reach the top level from where you have descended. What is the top level? You have to, it is called reverse evolution. You are evolving forward. You have come backward. We are actually going forward to where we started. It's called reverse evolution. Pradiprasava is the word used in the Yoga Sutra literature you find. It means we have traveled a long distance from our true nature. That is, we got detached from our Purusha identity. A Purusha identity is consciousness, Chaitanyam, Chetana. And then we identified ourselves with Prakriti. And then we started descending to Mahatattva, Ahankara, the mind, intellect, then eventually, ultimately, the empirical world, Pancha Mahabhutas, the five elements. We have come down descending, we have come down to the top, to the bottom layer of the ladder. Now we have to start our journey back to where we started, and that is the essence of yoga. So it is reverse evolution. We call involution, is called. And actually Aurobindo has taken one small minute aspect of this. So you find in Aurobindo's philosophy, from life and finally the evolution to a Superman. And we had to get out of the physical cage in which we limit ourselves, and then going beyond the physical, the mental, the intellectual, eventually to Prakriti, and then finally we had to identify our true nature as Purusha. This is the scheme of reverse evolution in yoga. It's called Pradiprasava. Means we are moving back to where we started. We have come down several steps below, descending again and again. Now we have to ascend. We have to start ascending the steps, reaching the top layer from where we descended. So first you should begin your journey by understanding what's the external world that makes you infatuated towards this, that creates this aversion, extreme liking, extreme dislike. That's what makes me a slave of the external world. I'm happy now and happy next moment. So once we analyze, then we understand the tanmatras, the 5 subtle elements. Then we identify the mind, which is even behind all this, then intellect, and then prakriti, and finally we identify ourselves with Purusha. So that's an important point. Remember, Yoga Sutra. Yoga is an ancient technique of helping us to become more civilized, more cultured, more refined. That's a very simple common sense language, and that's what we call becoming more spiritual. So this idea behind.
Swamiji, I have a question.
Yeah.
Sorry, does someone else want to go?
Go ahead.
Yes, okay. Yeah, thanks. Swamiji, so I want to know, you said yoga is the end result, right? It is the end point, and not the process as we usually use the term. Yeah. Could you just comment more on that?
Yeah, thank you. No, when Patanjali defined yoga as yoga chitta vritti nirodha, then by yoga he means reaching the ultimate destination, some prajnata samadhi, according to some, that is a highly advanced state of concentration. In fact, that's what we are going to discuss in the coming sessions, hopefully. So that is that niruddha state, when we transcend all vrittis, when we become identified with our own swarupa, our own true nature. That is yoga. But in a secondary sense, yoga could mean all the practices that you have to do to reach the goal. There is a particular metaphor in Sanskrit language. It's called, you are cooking food. You don't cook food. What you get after cooking is called food. It's not so. You are baking bread, you may say. You don't bake bread, because bread is something that is a result of baking. So again, you say, I'm cooking food. Actually, I don't cook food. Food is what the result of my cooking. You follow the point. So you find yoga could mean the process of gradually evolving towards the higher stage. It also could mean the higher stage itself. So
thank you so much.
It's a problem of language. Okay.
Yeah.
So there's a question on the YouTube, man.
Yeah.
So Jatin asks, how should a beginner start the study of Yoga Sutras along with attending this lecture series?
Yeah, I would say it comes. We will discuss this maybe after 2-3 weeks, because when we take up the sadhana pada, the first sutra comes, Kriya Yoga, tapaswadhyaya ishara pranidhananani Kriya Yoga. When we discuss Kriya Yoga, that is the first step is mentioned there. So the first 2-3 sutras of sadhana pada, which we are going to take up, we'll discuss that. I'm dealing with these early sutras of samadhi pada now, just to make clear what yoga is all about, because many of the definitions occur in these sutras. That's all. So how we step, anyway, to beginning itself, do something good. That is Kriya Yoga. Our mind is constituted of vrittis, vasanas, samskaras, impulsions, attitudes, etc. Now, some of them may not be very friendly, and some of them are very friendly. So, how to turn our mind into our best friend? When you are in perfect harmony with your own mind, then you feel a kind of inner joy and satisfaction and contentment. To do that, we must befriend the mind, and we must give good food to the mind, and we must feed the mind with good food, so to speak. And the basic fundamental first step is to do something good. Any good action, not physical action alone. Action here could mean word, speaking good word, listening to good words, maybe thinking good thoughts, having good ideas. Anything positive will give our mind some good food, and mind enjoys that, and mind will thank you for that. How? Mind will slowly start cooperating with your good intentions, your good samskaras, your good feelings, etc. So that is the first step. So, for example, if you can do anything, if you can't go out and do something good in this coronavirus pandemic season, then we can create good positive samskaras in our mind by reading good things, thinking good things. And when when the lockdown is lifted, you can attend these programs, you can organize these programs, you can go to nearby temple or any place, any public place, do some karma yoga. I've seen this really happening. Many devotees in our own congregation who go on doing a lot of unselfish, totally selfless activities, totally free from any selfish motive. The embodiments of karma yoga idea, absolutely unselfish, selfless. Now, why they do that? I don't know why they do that. Because by doing good things, they derive a great joy. In fact, that's something very interesting. And this is something which is so valuable for mental health. So you find physical activities generate spiritual energy, spiritual effect, you find. This is something very interesting. Any kind of good, positive physical activity, which we can do easily, will generate spiritual energy. So any kind of karma yoga, any positive activity is the first step in the practice of yoga. That's why Kriya Yoga, Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, all these are implied in the description of Kriya Yoga. That's the first sutra of Sadhana Pada, I find. That is stepping stone. I mean, that welcoming you to enter the path of yoga. I took up these sutras in the Samadhi Pada just because I wanted to introduce some of the definitions of Yoga Sutra. We will come back to Samadhi Pada later after finishing Sadhana Pada and Vibhuti Pada. We won't complete Samadhi Pada now, only just a few more sutras, then we straight away start with Sadhana Pada. Swamiji,
Relating to Sankhya, I have a couple of very small questions.
Yeah.
One is, you said Sankhya is a school of duality, right?
Yeah.
So how is it different from, say, something like Dvaita, which is in Uttara Mimamsa? So what is it that separates it from that is one question. The second question is, Sri Krishna talks about Sankhya in the Bhagavad Gita.
Yeah.
And in one of the previous lectures, you mentioned that Bhagavad Gita is one of the most Advaitic texts of all time. So then, how does a dual concept like Sankhya fit in?
Yeah, true. So, first, the question number one, Sankhya system is called Dvaita, and not in the sense we call Madhva Ramanuja system is Dvaita. Remember, Madhva Ramanuja systems emerged much later. Ramanuja was born maybe in 1080, around that time. Madhva was born maybe some 80-90 years later. So the Sankhya system is much more ancient. Sankhya Sutras attributed to Kapila belongs to the 4th century BC. So it's so ancient. Ishvara Krishna is the author of Sankhya Karika that we read today. There is a foundational book of modern Sankhya philosophy. Ishvara Krishna belonged to 3rd century AD, so to speak. And Ramanuja, Madhva, then Dvaita, Visita Dvaita and Dvaita system emerged in the 11th and 12th century. So there is a wide gap time period between this. That is one thing. So Dvaita, in general sense, Dvaita means any system of philosophy which accepts more than one absolute fundamental category. That is the meaning of Dvaita. Dvaita doesn't mean two as such, more than one, the Dvaita. So any pluralistic or dualistic system can be called Dvaita in the conventional sense. Second question is about Bhagavad Gita. The second chapter of Bhagavad Gita is called Sankhya Yoga. The Sankhya means Jnanam. So Sankhya-iti, Jnayate-iti Sankhya. Sankhya in the Bhagavad Gita, it means Jnanam, knowledge. It is a part of Jnana Yoga. Sankhya has got this name because that is the most widely accepted explanation. This name the Sankhya system got this name, derived this name Sankhya because it is related to number. The Sankhya means number in Sanskrit. Sankhya means knowledge. Sankhya means number. And because the Kabila system or Ishvara Krishna's Sankhya philosophy speaks about 24 Chadurvimshati Tattvas means, Prakriti and its 23 evolutes, together 24. So it got this name Sankhya philosophy, something related to Sankhya number. But please remember, this is very important to remember. The second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita is called Sankhya Yoga. Actually, it means Jnana Yoga. Sankhya there means Jnana Yoga. Sankhya-ide anena iti Sankhya. It means something by which you know the supreme reality. So there is a fundamental difference. Thank you for the question. It becomes clear.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
There's one more question from YouTube, Maharaj.
Yeah.
Gomati asks, could you please explain the difference between Kriya Yoga and Karma Yoga?
Yeah, Karma Yoga is included in the Kriya Yoga. When we take up that, you will understand Tapas, Swadhyaya, etc. Karma Yoga is included in Kriya Yoga. Kriya Yoga mentioned the Sadhana Pada, the first sutra, is an elaborate way of opening a new chapter in our life, entering the path of yoga. Suddenly, actually, it's almost like starting a different kind of evolution, not Darwinian evolution, because there is no scope for further evolution at the biological level. We cannot have another head or another hand. It's not possible. But there is plenty of scope for further evolution in the world of culture, refinement, values. There is enormous scope for further evolution. So actually, Kriya Yoga mentioned in the first sutra, Sadhana Pada, it refers to Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Jnana Yoga, and also Bhakti Yoga means Ishwar Pranidhana is mentioned there, and then Tapa is mentioned there, meditation, prayer, and so on mentioned. So Karma Yoga is one elementary form of Kriya Yoga. Yeah.
Good evening, Swamiji. This is Mark.
Yeah.
I think I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, but this word keeps coming up for me, and I'd like you to just speak briefly about what a vikalpa is.
What is it? What?
Vikalpa.
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 Oh, Vikalpa, yeah. You know, something that a word or idea that we may read, that we may register in our mind without a corresponding objective reality. This is called Vikalpa. To give an example, of course the classic example of Vedanta is very relevant here. You mistake the rope for the snake, and till you bring light, you are under the impression that it is a snake. The snake is a vikalpa, actually, and you mistake the same rope for a crack on the floor, or maybe a stick, or a curved stick perhaps. All these are vikalpas. So vikalpa in Sanskrit grammar, vikalpa means all. That's the meaning. So very often iti vikalpa in Sanskrit, Panini's grammar, vikalpa means another possibility, another option. That's meaning here. But in this particular context, vikalpa, the real implication of vikalpa can be understood from this example that I gave just now, the well-known analogy, the rope snake analogy. Before you brought light, when you were scared that there's a rope, there's a snake in the room, you mistook the rope for the snake. Finally, you bring light and it has disappeared. So that is an example of vikalpa. Now, this example is only partially accurate. Why? Because this vikalpa will disappear the moment you bring light. Okay, the fear of snake will go away. But certain ideas, certain concepts that we accumulate in the mental system, they may not disappear immediately. When they are corrected, the vritti created by the false vikalpa will become weak, but they may not always disappear. I give the example, certain cases of obsessions, fears, due to some previous misunderstanding or anything, can be examples of these vikalpas. How vikalpa vrittis sometimes distort mind. Delusions are examples. Delusions are vikalpa. Delusions, yeah. They have no objective reality, but still they have very powerful impressions in the mind. Now, Yoga Sutra's genius is that it pinpoints, it clearly tells you about these things. And once we understand, we will be able to throw the flashlight into our own mind and we know, oh, this is how it really works. Then that's very helpful, really speaking. A counselor may not be able to help you that way, because there is so much of medicine, so many other things, and by the time you finish the treatment, you become a mental wreck. But here, Patanjali, without disturbing your mind, without encroaching upon your own mental world, is simply giving you a flashlight. Come on, you just use this flashlight and you can enlighten the dark corners of your own mind. That's something very interesting. Yeah.
Can it also be considered like a fantasy? Something you think of that's not really...
Yeah, vikalpa.
Doesn't, huh?
Yeah. Fantasies also may come under the category of vikalpa. Yeah. Yeah. So if you have more questions, otherwise, thank you for this very, very helpful questions. Very, very interesting. Thank you. So, now we will continue in the next session. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.
The recording has